My name is Dr. Adebayo Asolo. My colleagues and my students call me Ade. I am a lecturer and course manager at Kepu Mano College. It is my pleasure in this short clip to share with you good practice from my 14 years of teaching. And I believe that this is going to benefit my colleagues who are new to teaching, or those who could also be a refresher to those who are not new to teaching and they've been teaching for quite some time. The area I want to focus on in this clip is um, assessment and feedback. So we're going to be looking at two areas, assessment and feedback. And the aim or my objective in this clip is to look into how appropriate and how to apply appropriate and fair method of assessment and provide constructive and timely feedback to support progression and achievement of students. So there are two things we are looking at: assessment. So we're looking at methods of assessment, and we're looking at how to provide constructive feedback to learners. So let us start by looking at assessment. Assessment. What are they? What does it mean? Assessments are ways to find out what students have learned and if they are aligning to curriculum or grade level standard. What do we need to assess? Or why? Let's say, why do we need to assess? There are reasons why we assess students. We assess to measure relationship between teachers' aim and students' output. We assess to test students' progress. We assess to diagnose particular weakness or weaknesses and or highlight strengths in students. We assess to provide feedback to learners, leading to future improvement. We assess to provide feedback to teachers also. So it's not only to students, but also to lecturers. We assess to provide feedback to other stakeholders. I'll be talking about other stakeholders, including the student themselves, their next of kin or parents or guardians, the awarding body, the funding provider, etc. We assess to select students for courses of study or employment. We assess to predict future achievement. We assess to estimate learners' current skill. What is the current skill of that learner? We assess um, um, or assessment form part of students' profile of abilities. We assess to contribute to some publicly recognized accreditation system, right? We also assess to recognize prior achievement and experience and possibly to lead to credit accumulation and transfer. We assess to demonstrate to students that they have attained some goals and acquired some skills. And we assess to motivate learners. There are two key things I want to look at now, and I want us to understand terms and types of assessment. So let us look at assessment of learning and assessment for learning. You will notice that there are two key words here that differentiate these two statements. First is of, and the second is for. So what are assessment of learning? Assessment of learning are usually graded. So when you say, or when you talk about assessment of learning, these are the kind of assessments that are graded. In other words, we give pass, merit, or distinction. Sometimes we say A, B, C, D, E. When we categorize or calibrate the grade of students, that is assessment of learning. Now, there are different ways we can carry out this kind of assessment. It could be through examination, where students sit for exam, they achieve grades, pass, merit, or distinction. There are other methods also. We can ask them to, we can assess their portfolio. In the portfolio, there could be diaries, logbook, it could be laboratory notebooks, it could be work experience documents that we assess as portfolio. And we could also look at final projects of students and grade them on final projects. There could be standardized tests that we give to students. There could be assignments that we write for students as we do in college. And there are observations that we also do. Practical, for example, when students are carrying out practical um, uh, activities. You can assess the practical activities through observations or do competency assessment for students. And you can also write witness statements to make judgment for students. As I said before, these kind of assessments are concrete, they are grade-based. So they have a concrete grade that are attached to them. And this is because stakeholders will be interested in these grades. The parents, the students themselves, the teachers, colleagues, the college managers or the institutional managers, even the competing institutions may be interested in how many, the performance of your college or of the students. Awarding bodies definitely will be interested in it. Employers sometimes want to know whether a student has had a first class or second class or pass or merit or distinctions, and awarding bodies usually are interested in it. Now, this kind of assessment, when we say assessment of learning, it is a summative assessment. So they are summative assessments. In other words, they sum together, as the name dictates. They put together all the various knowledge that students have gathered in the course of running that program. And that's why we call it a summative assessment, right? No matter the kind of assessment we give to students or that we do, we must ensure that we keep to best practice. We keep these practices in mind. And let me just look at some of those things that are important when we carry out assessments. We must make them level appropriate. If you're assessing students at level 1, the kind of assessment must be such that it meets that level. It will be different from when you are assessing students on level 3. Another important thing is assessment should not be vague. When you write assessment to students, it should relate to the real, it should be kind of life assessment. It should relate to, it should be relevant to life. It should be relevant to life. It should not give vague, ambiguous things, and you're assessing students with them. We must make questions to be very clear, and instructions should be easy to follow. So when you give questions to students, they must be clear. I have seen assessments or assignment papers in the past, and the questions inside are very confusing, even to teachers. We need to give rubric so that students know what is expected. There must be an expectation attached to the assignment so that students know what is being expected of them to do. We need to create, whenever we are setting assignment or giving assessment to students, this should be given after the student has been taught that particular lesson. You do not assess students on what they've not been taught about. It makes them to lose confidence. And finally, when you are assessing students, you need to make sure you try blind grading. Don't look at the name on the assignment before you mark, so that you are not biased in making judgment in that assignment. The next type of assessment is assessment for learning. Remember the word of and for. What is assessment for learning? Assessment for learning is a kind of a capture of a snapshot. It's a clear, it provides you with a snapshot of student learning and understanding. So in other words, during the course of lesson, you can check the knowledge of students as the lesson progresses. So when you are making this kind of assessment, it is called assessment for learning. And this could be done. There are different ways you also carry this out for students. We can carry that out through question and answer, progress reports. Short quizzes can be carried out, can be given to students in the course of the lesson. We could do things like virtual classroom tools. We use tools like Kahoot and stuff to check the knowledge of students in the course of carrying out such assessment. Now, as opposed to what we call summative assessment, in the first type of assessment, which I call assessment of learning, in this kind of assessment, it is formative assessment or diagnostic assessment, all right? Whatever the kind of assessment that we set for students, we must have two things in mind. The assessment must be valid and it must be reliable. What do I mean by valid? This is the extent to which it measures what is supposed to measure. If you want to measure the knowledge of students in biology, for example, you want to check their knowledge on respiratory system, the kind of assessment you set for them must focus on that, must target that, and you should be able to measure the knowledge that they have achieved in that. For example, you want to check the different parts of the respiratory system from nostril to the trachea to the lungs to the bronchial to the bronchus. That assessment should be able to validly check that knowledge. The next thing about, or the second thing about assessment is it has to be reliable. What I mean by reliable is it has to be consistent. Consistency means the same assessment you have set for that student should be able to produce the same pattern of score with the same population of students on 2 different occasions. So if I should be able to set respiratory system assessment for students this year, and when I set it for students, I should be able to set the same student, I should be able to set the same assignment next year for another group of students, okay? But on these 2 occasions, I should be able to, it should give me the same pattern of score. So it should be reliable enough to check the knowledge of those students, even though it is being done at different periods of the year, okay, or for different group of students. The next thing I want us to look at is constructive feedback. Remember, I said we're going to look at 2 things, assessment and feedback. So let us look at how do we give constructive feedback to students. The feedback you give to students is as good as how well you give it. If you do not give good feedback to students, then there's no point assessing the students. So the time that is being spent to set assessment for students is not going to be worth it if we do not give quality and constructive feedback to those students. So what are the things that we need to bear in mind when we discuss feedback? What is feedback? Feedback itself is a judgment that the teacher makes on the student's piece of work. So a student has written an assignment or has produced an assignment or produced a work. When you make a judgment, that judgment you now communicate back to the students your own judgment about that piece of work. All right? Feedback is always formative, even when we are giving that feedback for a summative assignment. For example, you must have in mind that even when you are, even if it's an exam and you are writing about that assignment, that piece of assignment, you should bear in your mind that if the feedback you have written should get into the hand of the student or whoever is looking at it, it should be formative. It should be able to make the students to improve in a way. It should form the students into a better student. And that's what we mean by formative assessment. What is the benefit of feedback to students? Feedback helps students to understand the marks they have achieved. For example, if I write an exam, I want to know how I fared. I want to know what I've achieved. Feedback helps you to communicate that to the students. So it makes the students to know what they have. It makes them to know what to improve upon in future. So if a student has written an exam or in a unit, if they've been assessed, let us say there's a unit 5 and they have been assessed. They want to know when they get to the next unit, how they can improve. So improvement for the future. And your feedback must communicate that to that student. The student should be able to understand their progress against learning outcomes. It should be able to identify strength and weakness. You should not be shy to write about the weakness of students in your feedback. You should not be shy. You should be able to boldly write the weakness clearly to the student, because if they do not know their weakness, then how do they improve? It's also important that you highlight their strength, because when they know their strength, then it builds their confidence, right? And it motivates them. It helps students to improve their understanding of the subject, the core subject and they build upon their learning. They can develop some other skills. Apart from the core subject skill, there could be literacy, numeracy, IT skills, employability skills that they need to also improve upon. They can make choice about study pathway. When a student is performing well in a particular area of study, for example, if a student is doing well in veterinary nursing, it could easily suggest to them. If a student is doing very well in animal nursing in college, it could suggest to the students and give students confidence to be able to progress or to communicate to the student, oh, I will be good as a veterinary nurse. So it could help a study pathway for the student. It could also help the student to know whether they are properly skilled for higher education. If a student is scoring distinction, for example, and merit, they know that yes, I am capable of doing well in higher education. Right? Feedback helps students to become self-reflective practitioners and lifelong learners. An interesting thing which I have used in my career is what I call 5 fingers of effective feedback. I use these 5 fingers, and you will notice that when I started discussing this, if you look at when I was discussing about effective constructive feedback, I put this finger, this hand. Why did I put this hand? I put the hand because it makes me remember when I'm giving feedback to my students, there are 5 things that I will need to remember. And until I meet these 5 requirements, I have not given a quality feedback to my student. Number 1, the feedback must be clear. Anybody that picks my feedback must be able to, it will be clear to them and not ambiguous. The student must pick their feedback, read it, and it has to be clear to them what I've highlighted. The feedback must be accurate. If a student has achieved, they worked up to distinction level, the feedback must reflect it. A student, it is not good for a student to have worked to distinction level and then you are giving a pass grade. It is not good. And and the other way around, if a student is working on a pass grade, you don't want to give a distinction level. Don't forget that students themselves discuss. They can compare their notes. And it will not be good for the teacher if the student realizes that a student who has not written well has achieved a distinction grade. That means your grading is not accurate, right? The third thing is fairness. It is good that in marking we are fair to students. Fairness in the sense that when you are giving feedback, you think about equality and fairness. Let us assume we have a student who is physically challenged, and then you want to communicate to that student a feedback. If you give a feedback that the student will have to read, how does that means you have not been fair to that student? Okay, because he cannot or she cannot read. Okay, she cannot see. But if you are communicating with that student by talking to that student, then you are being fair to that student. You are treating the same student as equally as you are treating someone who can read, if who can see, if you write it down. So this is just a small example of fairness. It could manifest in different ways. A student may have physical challenge. How do you tell a student who has physical mobility challenge to carry out an activity that require physical energy? You have not been fair to that student in the setting of the assignment or the assessment. And if you are giving feedback to that same student as if the student does not have physical mobility or mobility challenge, then you have not been fair to that student. This can be applicable in different ways. We need to be fair. We need to treat them equally. For example, you do not treat gender differently when you are marking their work. If the way you mark a student who is a female is the same way you mark for male, you are not to be unfair based on race. When you mark work for students, irrespective of their color, of their background, they have to be treated fairly. Now, these are things that do happen in feedback, in assessment, and it is important that we highlight this in our discussion. The feedback must be developmental. We might talk a little bit about this more later on. But what I mean by this is it should help a student to be able to improve when next they have to do another exam or when next they have to do another assignment. The last thing about my 5-finger check for my feedback is what I call timeliness. I'm not only a veterinary surgeon, I'm also a barrister. And there's a saying in law which says, judgment delayed is judgment denied. No matter how good a judgment is, when it is not given on time, it is not good. So we need to make sure that the turnaround of the feedback to our students is reasonable. It could be 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever is the college or the institutional standard, we need to meet that standard. So as quickly as possible, we need to turn around to students. And this is because there's tendency to forget the work that has been done if the feedback is delayed for too long. Memory cannot retain information beyond a certain time. So we need to realize this in students. The next thing I want us to look at are features. I have put together some tips for good feedback, some quick tips that we can just have on our fingertips for writing feedback. Watch your mood before you mark students' work. Avoid marking on your bad days. Because you are a psychological being, we all have good days and bad days. Don't mark student work the day you've just had a rouse with your partner. Don't use marking to cure your anger. Don't mark it, because the tendency is that you are going to transfer your anger or your aggression to the student work. So you must be in a very good mood when you are marking students' work. As I said, the 5-finger test: clear, accurate, fair, developmental, and timely. When you are marking students' work, no matter how poor the work is, no matter how bad the work is to you, you must look for the positive. Start your comment with a positive statement. Well done. This is good. A good start. Don't start with, oh, this is a very bad work. Don't start with, oh, you have not thought enough about this work. No, that can be discouraging. It can be demoralizing. Remember, the students are also living beings, and they can be motivated by your comment or your statement. So we need to praise the learner and to motivate them. Use kind words, use good words in your feedback while you are trying to, particularly to start the statement. If student has done very well, praise the student, and that is good. Relate feedback to assessment and grading criteria. Do not manufacture, do not create grading criteria, assessment criteria after you have set an assignment or after the student had finished the work. Don't make your grading an afterthought. Grading criteria should be set before a student does the work, so that side by side, you can look at what is expected to be marked and use that. That is when judgment will be fair and accurate. When you mark students' work, ensure there are ticks and annotations as you are marking. What that does, it gives an impression to the student that somebody is reading the work. Now, if you are a lecturer and you are not putting annotation ticks on student work, you are giving an impression that you are not reading the work. And when students find out that you are not reading the work, they can start putting substandard information in the work, and they will get away with it. When I'm showing you some practical papers, I will show you examples of some of the things I meant by this. But make sure there are ticks on annotation. It is not only a good practice for you, it's also a requirement for verification. If somebody has to verify that work, which is a standard of quality, they will need to see that the work has been well annotated. I try to use different color. When the student has marked with blue, when the student has written with blue, I mark with red, with black. When they have written with black, I mark with blue. And this is because it makes my comment to stand out on their paper or on whatever I have put. If it's an electronic thing, electronic feedback, it makes that to stand out. So you could be thinking about this also as a good practice. It helps them to see area to focus on. If you make a circle, if you make a mark, it makes them to see it. It also helps when you are marking a referral, because when you want to do a second marking, if you have told the student to check spelling, when they have to do a correction, you will know where you had made the first comment, and then you can relate that in the second paper the student is submitting to you. There's what I call the psychology of red in my practice. I avoid using red. And that is because we associate red with danger. Red is not welcoming. I told you I am not only a veterinary person, but I'm also a barrister. And it will interest you to know that in some jurisdictions, when judges wants to give judgment, when there is a judgment of when they want to sentence to death, they have to wear a red robe. So red for me communicates danger. It communicates extreme danger. So I avoid using red ink to mark students' work. So that is my practice. Make sure your writing is clear and easy to read. There's nothing as bad as a lecturer himself, a teacher having a bad handwriting, when handwriting is one of the things you are meant to correct in the work of the student. If you find that you have bad handwriting, then it is better for you to give electronic feedback to the students so that they are able to read. It is not good for you to give a feedback to students and the student is now giving the feedback to you in an email to say, sir or lecturer, I cannot read what you have written. I mean, the student has turned to become your own assessor if that happens. So you need to avoid that. Use simple words and sentences, easy to understand statement. Don't use the student's work to show off on how much vocabulary you have. They are students, and the beauty of communication is for them to understand what you have written. Avoid correcting spellings mistakes with spelling errors. Just as I said before, you want to correct somebody's spelling mistakes, and then you are correcting with spelling errors. You want to correct somebody's spelling mistakes, and you are also making spelling errors. That is not good. All right. So you need to be conscious of it when you are writing to them to say, is my grammar correct also? Because one of the things you want to correct in their work is their English. You need to improve on your own. Make it developmental in terms of core subjects. So develop the students in core area of the subject, whether you are doing biology or you are doing anatomy or you are doing chemistry or you are doing welfare. Make sure it develops the core subject. Think about progression and career. I said that before. If the student is supposed to progress to higher education, in your feedback, you should have at the back of the mind that, for example, a student needs to reference the work, because that is going to be required for higher education, and they need to use Harvard reference. So make sure that such comments are made when you are giving feedback to students. Make it developmental in terms of literacy. So think about punctuation marks, think about paragraph, think about capital letters, think about heading, title, think about maths and English. What about look for opportunities for maths and English, units, numbers, and make comments about them, because these are skills they will be using after when they start work. Okay, we call them employability skills. Think about the IT. Think about the layout of the work. Think about the color separation. Think about the font, the characters they've used. Make comments on all these small things, and they are developmental because they're going to help the student to be conscious, to be aware of those things. And think about qualities, some other employability skills like time management. If a student has handed in work late, let the student see that it was a late submission and make that comment so that they can improve on that. Think about organizational skill. How have they organized their papers? Students have submitted works to me in the past, and the papers are rough and they have been mishandled. Some have torn their assignment briefs, and it gives me an opportunity to support the students in the area of organization, to write about it, to take note of it, to let them know that I know. Let the student know that you know. Okay? Professionalism, health and safety. All these are very important. Now, what I've done as I try to round up on this conversation or this sharing good practice is to look at some samples of works I'd marked in the past. So let us see this. You will see that when I talk about making annotation, I made annotation on this paper. I am making this paper anonymous. So I've removed students' name from these samples. So this is an example of a unit, which is work experience assignment. Look at this comment on 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. On this paper, I've put a tick, I've put ticks, I've put circle. So let us see what that means in the in-depth comment. 1.1 means always begin your assignment with introduction of what you need to do. So, because I want the student to start with an introduction. So I have said, begin with introduction. And I've put that where I think introduction should be, not below. I put it on top of that paper. I want to see an introduction. Now, which career have you researched for this task? The student has said evidence of research. I want to see which career, because that is what the criteria required him to do. All right. And I've put a circle. And I did not use, you can see that I used a different color. This is a pink, this is an orange color or yellow color, whatever, light yellow or deep yellow or orange. And you see, I said I avoid red. So if you, and that's because the software we use for this does not have a blue. Otherwise, I would have used a blue ink over the black, but it doesn't matter. I avoided using the red. So, but it's going to stand out to the student what I was talking about. In 1.3, evidence of research have to be screenshot or reference. So I made a comment, okay? 1.4, begin your sentence with capital letter. What am I doing in 1.4? I'm telling the students, I'm checking literacy. Literacy. You can see that here, he has not used a capital letter. You don't overlook such things, because otherwise, now that is different from the core subject. These are literacy or numeracy, as the case may be. And in number 5, 1.5, here I'm looking at capital letter and punctuation marks, okay? Punctuation marks and capital letter. So as you read, and when you make it part of you, it flows as you mark. It flows as you mark. There are many other comments that we can make. Let's look at another example of another student. Here, you can see the student have used, has done graph, which is statistics. So look at my comment on 13.3 and 13.4 and 13.5. So let's see that 13.3, good application of statistics and maths in use of bar chart. So the student has used bar chart. I made a comment. You can overlook some of these things, and that is going to be missed opportunity. But when you reinforce it, student knows that, yes, it is something I'm going to be doing, and it is improving their skill. It's improving career skill, it's improving progression skill, it's improving their performance skill. Layout is very good here, IT is very good here. So I make comments about all these things. In 13.4, I said BD, because D is a distinction. So you must relate your feedback to the criteria. The criteria says this. So let the students see where they are meeting those criteria on the paper. And that's exactly what I've done here for this student. D3, D2, and I've made those comments to show that they are meeting those criteria. Another thing here is where on this particular one, another student, I am marking using a Word document. So that's a Word document submission. So what have I done? I've made my comments on the right, and you can see it is matching the line. And I'm looking at all the important things. Marketing plan document should have cover page, because I expected those things to be on top here. Cover page, content page, image, logo, name of company. Where I wanted it to be, I've put it there for them. So the student is able to match. And they will see that I'm reading, because I'm putting my comments. Capital letter. I want to see capital letter. Look at this M, marketing. You cannot start a sentence without using capital letter. So let us develop the students to be what we call all-around students. Let us improve their students. Now, most of the time, college students might not be very academically inclined. But don't forget that what we call distance travel, you must improve a student from where they get into your hand. The students are like a chick in your hand. By the time they finish, they need to be improved. You don't leave a student the way they get into your hand. You must improve them. And you must raise the consciousness and the awareness in these students. So I make comment about spelling. I make comment about other things, punctuation, as important as the core aspect of the course. Okay. Now, this is very tricky. The next one I want to show you now. And what I want you to look at here is how will you feedback these students on yellow highlight? on this yellow highlight. Now, I have given an assignment on pathogens, on bacteria, salmonella. Student has been writing. Student has achieved pass, P2, P2. And then as I was reading, I saw this yellow highlight. And let me read that to you. This one time, my brother's ex-girlfriend told me a story about how when she was trampolining, one of the girls there had put raw chicken breast in her bra to make her boobs look bigger. And when she was trampolining, they went flying out all over the room. True story. Now, this is a student writing, giving me a work. On this work, now this is meant to be a scientific assignment. And then I'm beginning to see inappropriate words. I'm beginning to see unprofessional languages. You must not overlook that. You must not miss opportunity to correct that because you are preparing them to be professional. Okay? So what I've done is to make a comment. You must be tactful. While we want the students, you see what I said here, while it is good to relate assignment to everyday life, because we want it to be, we don't want assignment to be vague. We want it to be related to life. Okay? And I said, while it is good to relate assignment to everyday life, life examples, which is what the student was trying to do, consider using scientific examples. It makes your presentation to be more professional. Now you can see how I got around the students while not putting her down, while not discouraging her. I have turned it around to be able to show the students you need to be professional. So these are things you see when you read assignments. And that is how you apply your knowledge of quality feedback to students. And the student knows that we are reading the work. I have also put two assignment feedback that I've written for students. And maybe it will interest us to quickly go over this now. Well done. You efficiently covered all areas of criteria. Now, these are students who have achieved maybe a distinction. And then I had praised the students. Well done. I started with good comments. You provided a well-resourced and detailed portfolio, which was quality and professional standard. You included ethogram, analytical report. So what was I doing? I was telling the students how they've achieved the grade. And I mentioned relevant images, photographic evidences, scientific posters. You demonstrated clear understanding. So this is a quality and elaborate feedback, which is what should be done for students. Okay? You interpreted and analyzed. Okay? So I was making those comments so that students see what they are doing. They are happy. If you have been giving feedback before, you are happy to see that somebody is reading what you have done or what you have done. Your write-up was well referenced with a bibliography as evidence. And I've said this is good for progression to higher education. Your portfolio was well laid out. Okay? This was an excellent use of industry terminology. So I made comment about that. Throughout the article, with good sentence structure, attention to spellings, punctuation, paragraphing. This was a brilliant application. There was a brilliant application of maths, okay? In numbers and units, read other comments. So when I say read other comments inside your note, that means the student is going to go back to the notes and then read other comments inside the notes, okay? And finally, that's another one. Well done. These students, unlike the first one that has achieved all criteria, I still said well done, even though this was not achieving all criteria. Well done. You still have to look for something good. This is a good start. So there was a motivation to start. And then you have summarized most aspects of the report with good. You have summarized most aspects of your report, your written report, okay? Your folder is not detailed. So you can see that we started with at least something good. We don't start with your folder is not good, your folder is not detailed. We don't start with that, okay? And then your write-up was not referenced. So we are able to highlight the areas of improvement that we want the students to look into. Okay, you included a completed feedback form, okay, from your interviewer, which is good, but you need to write your own self-evaluation. You can see we are looking at the good and the bad. We are balancing. We are being fair to the students. You should proofread your report to avoid clerical errors. Okay, you should put all reference lists into bibliography at the end of your write-up. Ensure you have used Ava style. You may also include some images and content page to enhance your write-up and to make them more professional. Read other comments inside the report. So these are examples of how to give quality feedback to students. I hope that this sharing good practice has been of benefit to you, whether you are a lecturer who is new to teaching, or it could also be a refresher to you if you are an experienced lecturer. Thank you.